text begins with the description of a scene at the mouth of River Thames. River Thames is the river which flows through England, London, and this makes it quite clear that the novel opens. Technically, it opens in England, although the story is about Congo in Central Africa. So, there is a description of the scene where we are shown a yacht or a small boat called Nelly, which is anchored at the mouth of the fairway of River Thames. There is a fair sprinkling of such words as uh, waterway, then you have barges drifting up and up, drifting up the tide, then uh, you have such words as uh, the flood had made, the wind was nearly calm. I mean, all these terms are related with the sea. So, immediately after this, we are, as part of the description of the scene, we are introduced to five characters: the director of companies, the lawyer, the accountant, Marlowe. Four characters. They are on the deck of this yacht called Nelly. It is evening time, the sun is about to set, and we are told that Nelly is anchored at the mouth of Thames, which uh, which at this point flows into the sea. So, so a brief description of the four characters is given to us. The captain, the director of companies was our captain and our host. He resembled a pilot, which to a seaman is trustworthiness personified. Then, between us, there was, as I have already said somewhere, the bond of the sea. The lawyer, the next character, the best of old fellows, had the only cushion on the deck and was lying on the only rug. The accountant had brought out a box of dominoes, and Marlowe sat cross-legged right aft, leaning against the mizzen mast. So the director is standing in the bow, front part of the ship, and the remaining three characters are, we can say, they are lounging, they are sitting in a relaxed manner in the at the back of the deck on its sides, close to the mizzen mast. I have already said that the yacht is anchored. The time is the time of the evening. The sun is going to set. And at last, in its curved and imperceptible fall, the sun sank low, and from glowing white changed to a dull red, without rays, without heat, as if about to go out suddenly, stricken to death by the touch of that gloom brooding over a crowd of men. This comprises the opening. The opening has, I should say, three or four parts. It the opening, technically, strictly speaking, ends when Marlowe, who is sitting cross-legged on the deck, a man with sunken cheeks, yellow complexion, straight back, ascetic aspect, and with arms dropped, the palms of hands outwards, resembled an idol. So there are two terms which are used here to describe Marlowe and which appeal to us as very important, which are very striking. First of all, none of the other characters is described in this detail. Whether it is the director of companies, the lawyer, all of them have the bond of the sea. That means they are all seamen. And I have said that seafaring comprises a very important theme in this text. So none of the other characters is described in the same way as Marlowe because these very striking terms are used to describe Marlowe. I will just repeat three uh, three terms used in this description. He has sunken cheeks, he has an ascetic aspect, and lastly, he resembled an idol. I feel that this uh, has great importance and a very close relationship with the story that Marlowe will tell. So, the persona of Marlowe has a has a special importance in this text, and the persona is built as we go on. Before the story uh, begins to be told, and while the story is being told, there are points in the narrative where there are pauses in the story told by Marlowe, and the author uh, intersects and gives us more details about Marlowe. So not only it is the two things are equally important: the story told by Marlowe and the fact that it is told by Marlowe, because are special attributes in the character of Marlowe which are brought out constantly as the text progresses right from the beginning. The second section in the opening is in the it is in the form of a recollection of the history of, I should say, England. England, they say, was not like this from the beginning of the time. Why? Because because if we remember the history of England, if anyone remembers the history of England, it is quite well known that England was conquered by the Romans about 18 to 1900 years ago, and that marked the beginning of civilization. which means that before that period, England was also, if I borrow the term used in the title of the novel, England was also a dark place. And there is an interplay of darkness and light in connection with those places on this earth which are civilized and those places which are uncivilized. It will be, it is quite appropriate to state at the very beginning that darkness and light in the scheme of this text refer to civilization and backwardness. So England was also a dark place. It was not always like this. It was now somewhere in the opening, there is reference to the arrival of the Romans in England. This is, but before that, there is further information about Marlowe, the, the person who spins the yarn, who tells the story, who recounts this story. And this also, said Marlowe suddenly, has been one of the dark places of the earth. Interestingly, this is the first statement by Marlowe. Before this, the author is shown to be speaking. This is the first statement in the text made by Marlowe. What does he say? The statement has a historical ring to it. He says, "This also," said Marlowe suddenly, "has been one of the dark places of the earth." Now, after this, there is a long intervention by the author. And again, we are given some vital clues about this persona of Marlowe, through whom this story is going to reach us. And this information is both, it's a bit fascinating, it's alluring. It draws you to the persona of the person who's going to tell the story to you. And it is very relevant also, because after all, we have to relate the story back to Marlowe. Now, let me read out a few things from uh, this uh, description of Marlowe by the author in this arrangement of story within a story. He was the only man of us who still followed the sea. But Marlowe is not a typical sailor. The worst that could be said of him was that he did not represent his class. He was a seaman, but he was a wanderer too. So, after being called an ascetic with sunken cheeks, a person who resembled an idol, now we are told that he also was a wanderer. Of, we can say, if I borrow a term used by some other writer, he's a flâneur, a wanderer, a person with an inherent inquisitiveness, a desire to understand the world. He was a seaman, but he was equally interested in the life beyond the seas, which is normally not the case with seamen. Because for the seamen, sea is their universe. They travel around the world, but they never look beyond the shores. One ship is very much like another, and sea is always the same. This is how seamen look at life. Sea is always the same, and one ship is very much like the other in the immutability of their surroundings, foreign shores, foreign faces, changing immensity of life. Glide past by their disdainful ignorance. A typical seaman is filled with disdainful ignorance as far as the life on the mainland is concerned. There is nothing mysterious to a seaman unless it be the sea itself, which is the mistress of his existence, and as inscrutable as destiny. But this does not apply to Marlowe because, unlike a typical seaman, he is a wanderer, he's an explorer. And by the way, there is reference to earlier explorers like uh, Drake, Francis Drake, and John Franklin. Drake was a 16th century expeditionist, and Franklin was an 18th century expeditionist who famously went out in the sea and brought back riches to England. Okay. But that is just a passing reference. Going ahead, because Marlowe is going to begin his story, something very significant is said in this description of Marlowe. I will read it. The yarns of seamen have a direct simplicity, the whole meaning of which lies within the shell of a cracked nut. But Marlowe was not typical. To him, the meaning of an episode was not inside like a kernel, but outside, enveloping the tale, which brought it out only as a glow brings out a haze in the likeness of one of those misty halos that sometimes are made visible by the spectral illumination of moonshine. So, not only is Marlowe different, his stories are also different. You know that seamen are fond of spinning yarn, telling stories, but a typical seaman tells the story of hardships faced on the sea, of the struggles on the sea, struggles of the sea, the the trials and tribulations which the seaman has to pass through in his struggle to survive on the sea, his struggle with the waves, his struggle with the tides, his struggle with those forces of nature which are inimical to life. But in the case of Marlowe, the meaning is not there in the kernel, not the as was said, the shell of a cracked nut. Rather, the meaning envelops the story like the halo that surrounds a moon on a particularly illuminated night. So this we can obviously, since we are given a hint here, we can link this, that the meaning of the story that Marlowe is going to tell us in this arrangement of story within a story will have its meaning akin to the halo of the moon. It will be in the form of it will be in the form of a glowing sphere of light. Then we can say that the opening of this text ends with a rather extended historical account of the arrival of Romans presented in an imaginative way by the author, by Marlowe, sorry. Because when Marlowe resumes speaking, he says, I was thinking of old times, because he has already said that this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. Until the Romans came, it was uncivilized. He says, I was thinking of very old times when the Romans first came here 1900 years ago. Then the light came here. Then the light came here. Then this land became civilized. It was with the Romans that the civilization arrived in England through the Mediterranean, through the Roman generals who led legions. Legion is a very big group of soldiers. So, who led legions to this, to the Gauls, crossed sandbanks, marshes, forests, savages, and faced a pretty tough time exploring this uncharted territory. They did not have wine here, they did not have comforts here. They had to, they were men enough to face the darkness. They had to face darkness, they had to confront darkness, land in a swamp, march through the woods, in some inland post, feel the savagery, the utter savagery had closed round them. All that mysterious life of the wilderness that stirs in the forest, in the jungles, in the hearts of wild men. And then I will end with this. Mind, he began again. Marlowe once again pauses and then he begins again. He says, Mind, he began again, lifting one arm from the elbow, palm of the arm outwards, so that with his legs folded before him, he had the pose of a Buddha preaching in European clothes and without a lotus flower. Mind, none of us would feel exactly like this. And here we can say that the story begins, because the story is the story which Marlowe is going to narrate is the story of the modern day Europeans who are different from the Romans who came to England. In what sense? Romans were dictated, driven by brute force. The modern day Europeans who went to the other regions of the world, like Africa, are not driven by brute force. They are driven by ideas. And then he, while comparing the conquerors who first came to England with the European colonists, he says that the conquerors of earlier times were merely driven by brute force, by their desire to loot, by their desire to uh, invade territories. But the European colonists are, if I take a line from the text, they were conquerors, and for that you want only brute force. But sorry, they grabbed what they could get for the sake of what was to be got. It was just robbery with violence, aggravated murder on a great scale, men going at it blind. On the other hand, the conquests of the European colonists is linked with some beliefs. It is linked with a set of ideas. So, I quote, the conquest of the earth, which mostly means taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. What redeems it is the idea. It says the conquest of the earth by the Europeans under the system of colonial rule in modern times is is not a very pretty thing when you look at it closely, but what justifies it is a set of ideas that the colonizers uphold, believe in, that they bow down to. So, this comprises the inaugural, we can say, statement of the text, that the justification of the conquest of the earth with which this text deals by the Europeans is linked with some ideas that have taken form in the civilized world, and the text is an unraveling of these ideas and also an examination of the value of these ideas. So, the novel basically is a representation of colonial rule established by the Europeans in the other regions of the world. The perspective is of a European writer, and the writer tries to portray before us the intricacies of European colonialism. And the inaugural comment is this: the conquest of the earth, which means taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look at it too much. What redeems it is the idea. An idea at the back of it, not a sentimental pretense, but an idea, an unselfish belief in the idea, bowing down to the idea, commitment to the idea, is something that lends justification to colonial rule, and we can treat it, as I said, as an inaugural statement related to the thematic dimensions and the subject matter of this text. And we can also take it to mark the starting point of the long story that Marlowe is going to narrate to the other people sitting with him on the deck at evening time on the river Thames. And he says that it was a time when he had been to different parts of the East as a seaman and returned to England. It was a time when he was temporarily, we can say, free, and he was looking for a job as a skipper on a steamboat. He, at the same time, also reveals to us his fascination with the unexplored regions of the world. As I have already uh, shared with you, that the story is based on the experiences of Joseph Conrad himself when he went as a member of the crew of a boat to Congo while working for a Belgian company. So the text is based on the real life experiences of Joseph Conrad. And this experience of Joseph Conrad is presented to us through the figure, through the persona, through the character of Marlowe. So there is a correspondence between the story of Marlowe and the story of Joseph Conrad. And Marlowe reveals to us that the genesis of this voyage also lay in his childhood fascination with maps, and he always used to look at the blank spaces on the map. These blank spaces basically were featureless areas. They were featureless, without rivers, without other physical features, because these areas were still unexplored by the civilized world or by the Europeans. And he says that this inspired my fascination with the unexplored blank spaces on the maps, always inspired me. And particularly at this time when he was unemployed, he made up his mind to go to Africa, to a region in Africa, because he had always been fascinated the by the meandering shape of Congo River. There was it one river specially, a mighty big river that you could see on the map, resembling an immense snake uncoiled, with its head in the sea, its body at rest, curving afar over a vast country. So there is both, there is a combination of two factors which, so I was saying that it was a combination of both his desire to discover unexplored areas of the earth, explore unexplored areas of the earth, and as a seaman, his desire to return to the sea that act as the main reasons for his voyage to Africa and for his uh, for his journey to Congo Free State. So thereafter, there are some small details that he found out a company that was carrying on trade in Africa. He looked for some uh, looked for some acquaintances who could help him find a position as a as a member of the crew of a steamer in this company. And his the next now coming to the next part of this section, uh, this deals with his visit to the office of the company in Brussels. So this constitutes the next part in the opening of the book, in the first chapter, after our introduction to Marlowe, after Marlowe begins to tell his story with some remarks about the conquest of the earth, okay, how we can compare and contrast the Roman conquerors with who came to England and the Europeans who have gone out into the rest of the world. So after these, some practical details, some are given to us, and the next section deals with, as I said, his visit to the company in Brussels, which is the capital of Belgium. I got my appointment, of course, and I got it quick. So he gets his appointment with the bosses in the company. But the visit to the office of this company in itself is not only symbolic, but it is very suggestive. It's, I can say, a perfect exposition to the future that lies ahead of Marlowe, because it is strongly suggestive of some kind of ominousness, some mystery, some fate which is being held back. So, as I have said, there is an ominous ring to the entire episode of his visit to the company. It's kind of characterized by the bizarre. It's bizarre. It begins with this little detail. The detail is related to the person whom Marlowe is going to replace in Congo as an employee of the company. Now, what happened to that person? His name is Friesleven. Now, Friesleven, whom he is going to replace, died in Africa. And The sequence of events that led to his death is quite bizarre. I will read it out for you. It appears the company had received news that one of their captains had been killed in a scuffle with the natives. This was my chance, and it made me the more anxious to go. So we are given the simple fact that the company had lost one of its captain who had died in a scuffle with the natives. And then he says that I discovered the dead body of Friesleven when I went to those parts after several months. And what was the condition of the dead body? It was only months and months afterwards, when I made the attempt to recover what was left of the body, that I heard the original quarrel arose from a misunderstanding about some hens, two black hens. Friesleven, that was the fellow's name, thought himself wronged somehow in the bargain, and he went ashore and started to hammer the chief of the village with a stick. And it is the entire development was very strange, because Friesleven was thought to be one of the gentlest persons there. Then a big crowd gathered, and looking at the beating being given to the old man, his son, the chief's son, in desperation at hearing the old chap yell, made a tentative jab with a spear at the white man, and of course it went quite easy between the shoulder blades, and Friesleven died, and his dead body kept on rotting there in the undergrowth, in the grass, for months. The entire village decamped. They vacated the village out of fear. And we are also told that the village was set on fire in an act of revenge. And this forms the background against which we can say Marlowe is sent there. So this is followed by his visit to the company. First of all, the company is situated in Brussels, and he describes Brussels in a phrase. The phrase is that Brussels resembled a white spulker. Spulker is a monument where dead are buried. She says, it reminded me of a spulker. It was white, and spulker is suggestive of death. And as I said, just as the incident related to Friesleven has elements of grotesque in it, the visit to the office is once again very ominous in nature. Just as he enters, he finds two women dressed in black who are knitting while sitting in their chairs. Somewhere in the narrative, in this section itself, he says, it appears they were guarding the doors of darkness. It appeared to him that they were guarding the doors of darkness. Then a series of very eerie, strange, and bizarre uh, we can say things. His visit to the office of the company in Brussels concludes with a very strange episode, which is his examination by a doctor. He is examined by a doctor, and this interview with the doctor is, I should say, slightly amusing also on account of the things said by the doctor, which again add to the entire mystery of of his journey to Africa, journey to Congo. There was a visit to the doctor, a simple formality. Now, as I said, he is examined by a doctor, which is one of the formalities that have to be fulfilled before a person undertakes the journey to the colonial regions under this company. The old doctor felt my pulse, and then he asks permission to measure his head, take the measurement of his head, his cranium. And the reason given by the doctor is that I always ask leave in the interests of science to measure the crania of those going out there. He insists on measuring the head, the crania of the people who are going to work for the company by traveling to Congo. And when he desires to know that number one, why is the measurement of the head needed? The doctor answers that for the changes which take place inside. And when he desires to know whether there are some changes in the size of the head when the people return, so the doctor gives a rather ambiguous answer which seems to suggest that the people never come back. So you get a feeling of absurdity, a wastefulness, as well as you are intrigued, as stated earlier, as if a fate is being held back, something insidious is being hidden, a mystery is being kept under wraps, is being concealed. Then the doctor asks another very pointed question. He says, is there any madness in your family? And of course, Marlowe does not like the question. The meeting with the doctor gets terminated, and he goes to meet his aunt, who was instrumental in getting him this job. And on his visit to meet his aunt, he feels as if something else is being ascribed as the reason for his visit to Africa. He is looked upon as some kind of an apostle, some kind of a missionary by his aunt, because he says that it seemed that the old lady had some big ideas in her mind. Okay. The ideas, in the words of her aunt, are related with weaning those ignorant millions from their horrid ways. And he says, I had to remind her that the company is doing business and it is not involved in some kind of civilizing mission. And this section began with the word earth, conquest of the earth, and this section ends with the term earth when he says, I quote, the best way I can explain it to you is by saying that for a second or two, I felt as though instead of going to the center of a continent, I were about to set off to the center of the earth. Let us catch the thread from where we left. I felt as though instead of going to the center of a continent, I were about to set off for the center of the earth. We ended with this line. So this is the beginning of Marlowe's journey to the trading stations situated in the Free State of Congo in Africa. I left in a French steamer. The steamer goes, if you look at the map, okay, you will be able to make out that the journey of Marlowe from Europe to Africa goes along the long coast of Africa. While on the French steamer, passing along the coast of Africa, these are few noteworthy observations of Marlowe. Uh, Before he reaches the company station, he will spend 10 days in the company station. I will try to deal with that part today. Before proceeding to the central station, and from the central station, he goes to the inner station where the enigmatic figure of Kurtz resides. This journey to what is described as the heart of darkness is a journey which gradually takes Marlowe closer to this mysterious, enigmatic figure of Kurtz, whose name keeps haunting Marlowe as he goes deeper and deeper into Congo. But there is a series of incidents. There is a long line of characters whom he meets before he finally reaches the inner station where Kurtz lives. Kurtz is an embodiment of a large number of things, but we will wait for that. So, while going along the coast of Africa, every day the coast looked the same as though we had not moved. But we passed various places, trading places, with names like Grand Bassam, Little Popo, names that seem to belong to some sordid farce acted in front of a sinister black cloth. Sinister is an adjective, it's an epithet which can be very legitimately attached to so many things in this text. Sinister are so many things which happen along the way. Sinister, frightening, appalling, unusual, shocking, unpleasant. Once I remember we came upon a man of war anchored off the coast. There wasn't even a shed there, and she was shelling the bush. Man of war is a small ship. So the first I was alluding to a long line of things, incidents, events, episodes that can be described by using the epithet sinister, grotesque, bizarre, frightening, mysterious, absurd. And here is an absurdity. This ship is firing into the bush, and there is no one to be seen anywhere near the bush. So, reasonlessness. It appears, it appears the French had one of their war goings on thereabouts. Her ensign dropped limp like a rag. The muzzles of the long 6-inch guns stuck out all over the low hull. The greasy, slimy swell swung her up lazily and let her down, swaying her thin masts in the empty immensity of earth, sky, water. There she was, incomprehensible, firing into a continent. So, ostensibly, it was firing at an enemy, but the enemy was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that the ship was aiming its gun at something invisible, at an invisible enemy. So, this is the vista that opens up before Marlowe. He comes across and encounters so many similar absurdities, I should say. There was a touch of insanity in the proceedings, a sense of lugubrious drollery in the sight, and it was not dissipated by somebody on board assuring me earnestly there was a camp of natives, he called them enemies, hidden out of sight somewhere. Somebody shouts from the ship that there's a war going on, there are enemies in the bush, and we are trying to eliminate the enemies. But as far as the appearance is concerned, the whole thing looks preposterous, absurd, strange. So, like this, for 30 days he travels till he reaches the first stage in his journey to the center of Africa. It was upward of 30 days before I saw the mouth of the big river. And let us not forget that he has been appointed to act as a skipper of a steamer. He's going, the rest of his days are to be spent on this big river, the river Congo. And it was upward. So he, from the sea, he enters the river. It was upward of 30 days before I saw the mouth of the big river. We anchored off the seat of the government. And there, from there, uh, he disembarks from the French steamer and he takes the second steamer. And on this steamer, he travels some more distance before he reaches the company station. This is, let us say, his entry into the world of colonial trade, colonial business run by King Leopold II of Belgium in Congo Free State. The scenes and sights that accost him as he goes up the mountain at the end of the first stage of his journey to reach the company station are once again, we can say, are insidious, unpleasant, strange. A lot of people, mostly black and naked, moved about like ants. A jetty projected into the river. A blinding sunlight drowned all this at times in a sudden recrudescence of clear. There's your company station. There's your company station. So he reaches the company station, and as he is going towards the building, a small setup up the hill, he comes across the what we can describe as the first sight, which basically comprises six black men advanced in a file, toiling up the path. They walked erect and slow, balancing small baskets full of earth on their heads, and the clink kept time with their footsteps. Black rags were wound round their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like tails. I could see every rib. The joints of their limbs were like knots in a row. Each had an iron collar on the neck, and all went connected together with a chain whose bites swung between them rhythmically clinking. This is the first scene that meets his eyes. The scene of the sight of a long line of six black men walking in a straight line, but They are all they are all wearing the collars, connected with a chain and collars in their necks. They are they are tied with a single chain which connects all six, and there are collars in their necks. So this is the first scene which he sees on reaching the company station. They passed me within 6 inches, without a glance, with that complete death like indifference of unhappy savages. He has a premonition now of where he is. And this he expresses in a very powerful, hard hitting, a very evocative statement. He says, I have seen the devil of violence, devil of greed, devil of hot desire, but by all the stars, there these were strong, lusty, red-eyed devils that swayed and drove men, men, I tell you. But I, but as I stood on this hillside, I foresaw that in the blinding sunshine of that land, I would become acquainted with a flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of a rapacious and pitiless folly. He says, I, he has a premonition. He seems to have a kind of an ominous feeling that he's now in a situation which is characterized by something more evil than anything he has seen before in his life. And then the next thing, he passes through a grove in order to avoid the direct sunlight. He passes through a grove of trees, and there he comes across something even more frightening, something even more sinister. What is it? Black shapes crouched, sat between the trees, leaning against the trunks, clinging to the earth, half coming out, half effaced within dim light, in all attitudes of pain, abandonment, and despair. They were dying slowly, it was clear. They were not enemies, they were not criminals, they were nothing earthly now, nothing but black shadows of disease, starvation, lying confusedly in the greenish gloom. They had been brought from different parts of Africa to work in this station, but because they could not acclimatize themselves to this new place, in this new place, they could not adjust themselves to the new kind of life and work in the company station. They fell ill and they were left to die. They were abandoned to die in this dark grove of trees. And as he passes through this grove, all around him, he, he can see these figures reclining against trees, lying in different poses, sick, emaciated, starving, and and we can say dying a miserable and slow death. And he even sees one of them crawl on all fours. I am reading from the text. While I stood horror struck, one of these creatures rose to his hands and knees and went off on all fours towards the sea, towards the river to drink. So, this will, in the, we can say, in the uh, scheme of images, this will later on, quite late in the text, get connected with the image of Kurtz similarly crawling on all fours. And there you can make this connection between the two parties, the European colonists and the natives who happen to be colored people, people of color, black. Now, one thing, if you read the text carefully, will definitely uh, strike you as significant. He uses, one is that he tries to describe the natives in a particular way which uses generalities and stereotypes. So there is definitely a stereotypical presentation of the natives, which reduces them to a subhuman status. I have already quoted a few lines where the savages, they are called savages, they are shown walking in a straight line, wearing collars in their heads, in their necks. And I have taken down a few phrases which are used to describe these natives. Let me read out 5 or 6. They are described as raw matter, black shadows of disease and starvation, unhappy savages, phantoms, bundles of acute angles. So, this aspect of the text cannot be missed at all. And we will have more to say on this when we proceed and read the remaining part of this wonderful text. I shook hands with this miracle. Who is this miracle? The miracle is the chief accountant. He is the first representative of the company who meets Marlowe. And just as the writer shows a propensity to use the term earth again in the text, he also has this deliberate design of not naming the characters. He doesn't name the characters. He gives them, calls them by different. This can be counterbalanced with the generalities through which the natives are described. And when the representatives of the company are described. They are not given names. Chief accountant, and to put it briefly, this chief accountant is described as a miracle because in the general atmosphere of decadence, he is strangely enough immaculately dressed. He is called a hairdresser's dummy. He's so well dressed, he's so neat in his appearance, and he as an accountant, he's responsible for maintaining the books. So this station is a bookkeeping station of the company, where the entire uh, bookkeeping accountancy is carried out. So there is a contrast of this manager with the surroundings. There's a clear contrast between the surroundings and this manager, and that contrast is brought out in this section of the text. He stays in this station for 10 days before proceeding on foot to the next station, which is the central station, where he meets another set of characters whom he once again does not name. One day, now while he is in this station, one day he remarked without lifting his head, "In the interior, you will no doubt meet Mr. Kurtz." This is probably the first or the second mention of this figure, whose presence looms large all over the text. On my asking who Mr. Kurtz was, he said he was a first class agent. And seeing my disappointment at this information, he added slowly, laying down his pen, "He is a very remarkable person." And I have already given you a hint that in the end we will see Kurtz crawling on all fours, just like that figure in the grove who is sick. Kurtz will soon, the report will come that Kurtz is similarly sick. So there is an affinity which binds the two parties in one bond, as if. Mr. Kurtz was at present in charge of a trading post, a very important one in the true ivory country, at the very bottom of their, sends in as much ivory as all the others put together. And then he says, more information about Kurtz is given to us. And what is that? It is that he will go far, very far. He will be somebody in the administration before long. They above the council in Europe, mean him to be. And from there, here, he goes on a 30-day trek, leaves the station, goes further because he ultimately has to reach the steamer, which he has to steer as the skipper up the Congo and perform his duty for which he has been employed in that white sepulchre of a city in Europe, Brussels. So this is his journey towards his steamer. And for the next stage of his journey, he has to walk continuously several days before he reaches the central Sorry, it's not a 30-day trek, it's a 15-day trek, and at the end of which he reaches the central station. So, on reaching the central station, the first thing that Marlowe finds out is that the steamer which was to be placed under him, we know that he had been appointed skipper of a steamer, and that is the main reason that he's come to these parts. So, he finds out that the steamer has sunk, it has been lost. Uh, why? Because the steamer was sunk. They had started 2 days before in a sudden hurry up the river with the manager on board, in charge of some volunteer skipper. And before they had been out 3 hours, they tore the bottom of her on stones and she sank near the south bank. So it is obvious that now, since the steamer has been lost, the purpose for which he had come there seems to have been defeated, and now his job will be to retrieve the steamer, to salvage it from the bottom of the river, and to repair it so that it can be used. So this adds to the already, prevailing sense of futility that one seems to have noticed in his visit, in his during his stay in the company station before coming to the central station. Now, a lot of things happen at the central station which add to the sense of futility, the sense of that there is a plot which can be felt in so many different things. Now, the first person he meets at the central station is the manager. And I've already told you that now his days would be spent fishing out his command out of the river and repairing it. The sense of eeriness, the sense of futility is not the least strengthened by the various characters which come his way at the different places he goes to. In the central station, the first person he meets is the manager. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down after my 20-mile walk that morning. He was commonplace in complexion, in feature, in manners, and in voice. So just like the other characters that at the company station, we remember that he met the accountant, who he said contrasted with his surroundings, because while the surroundings were full of devastation, waste, and they were, to say the least, deplorable, he had he was immaculately dressed. He was immensely neat and tidy. So there was an incongruity in the, in the contrast between uh, the accountant and his surroundings in the company station. At the central station, he meets this second character who is equally unimpressive. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down, and he was commonplace in complexion and feature, in manners and in voice. And he was of middle size and of ordinary build. But more than that, this person, the manager, uh, who remains unnamed like the other characters, is described as a sinister persona. He behaves in a very mysterious way. He has a trenchant glance which falls like an axe, and he possesses an enigmatic smile that sealed every sentence he spoke. Marlowe felt that this man did not inspire respect, he did not inspire anything but uneasiness. But more serious is the charge that, let me quote, yes, he had no genius for organizing, for initiative, or for order even. That was evident in such things as the deplorable state of the station. He had no learning and no intelligence. His position had come to him. Why? Perhaps because he was never ill. This is an attribute which he notes in the manager, and it seems to him that this is the only quality that he possesses. And what is the quality? That this man just does not seem to have the ability to fall ill like other human beings. He seems to have a kind of an insulated life which remains unaffected by the disease, by sickness, disease that is so common in Africa. So, this was his trait, which probably made him endure even in those very difficult conditions. Let me quote once again. His position had come to him, perhaps because he was never ill, because triumphant health in the general route of constitutions is a kind of power in itself. And one suspected that maybe he was hollow from inside, that he did not have the viscera, the entrails, which fill the body of a normal person. So he just stops short of calling him a hollow man. This hollowness and this, what I have described as an insulated kind of a life, which does not get affected by anything around him, seems to be suggestive of inhumanness. So, if we take this point further and we link the various characters, starting with the accountant, the uh, the manager, and shortly we will be introduced to the next character, who is the first class agent with a forked, bare, and hooked nose. Again, this man is not given a name. He's described as first class agent. He's a third character in the line of characters that appear in the narrative one after the other. So, accountant, the manager, the first class agent with a forked beard and hooked nose. They all are characterized by some lack of humanity, a hollowness. He began to speak. Now, this is the manager he's referring to. He began to speak as soon as he saw me. And shortly after, in their conversation, he mentions once again the same name that seems to reverberate in absentia. Kurtz is nowhere near, but his name seems to reverberate, and his personality, his persona seems to loom large. Because if you remember what I said during the last lecture, he embodies, he's an embodiment of so many things. He personifies an idea, and I will just refer to the lines where Kurtz is described in a greater detail. But thus far, in manager's words, we get a following allusion to Kurtz. There were rumors that a very important station was in jeopardy, and its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. So, this is the next piece of information that we receive about this figure of Kurtz. So, he sets about repairing the steamer, and that is how his long stay at the central station passes. But it is time and again suggested that there is an atmosphere of wastefulness, of futility all around. One day, there is there is this next incident at the central station. What is it? Again, something inexplicable, which adds to this atmosphere of mystery, futility, wastefulness, inexplicable incidents which are almost irrational. They cannot be attributed to anything uh, which anything understandable. One evening, a grass shed full of calico, cotton prints, beads, and I don't know what else burst into a blaze so suddenly that you would have thought the earth had opened to let the avenging fire consume all that trash. So there is a kind of a store, and it is consumed by, it is made of, it's, it's a grass shed, and suddenly a fire breaks out and it is consumed by the flames of the fire. Efforts are made to extinguish the fire, to put out the fire, but within minutes, everything contained in that grass shed, cloth, calico, cotton prints, beads, they are all destroyed. Here he meets the person I was referring to, who is described as the first class agent, forked head, forked beard, hooked nose. Later on, he is described as a chattering idiot and a papier mache Mephistopheles. The other man remained. He was a first class agent, young, gentlemanly, a bit reserved, with a forked little beard and a hooked nose. And uh, officially, he was responsible for making bricks. But it is quite evident that he is busy in intriguing and not in making bricks. In one of the in at a point in the narrative, uh, the two the this first class agent and Marlowe are in his room, in the room of this brickmaker or the first class agent, and there he finds a painting which has been painted by Kurtz when he used to work at the central station a few years back. Then I noticed a small sketch in oils on a panel representing a woman draped and blindfolded carrying a lighted torch. The background was somber, almost black. The movement of the woman was stately, and the effect of the torchlight on the face was sinister. This painting of a woman carrying a torch, we are told, has been made by Kurtz. And there is a pretty long passage devoted to Kurtz, and which offers us the perspective of the first class agent about Kurtz once again. And this we can string it together. All these views help us to build the image of Kurtz, just as Marlowe is trying to do, because Marlowe here admits that Kurtz has almost made him sick, that he's getting to hear his name from everyone almost every day. And here's what the first class agent says about Kurtz. The chief of the inner station. Who is this Mr. Kurtz? This is the question to which he responds. Who is this Mr. Kurtz? The chief of the inner station. He answered in a short tone, looking away. Much obliged, I said, and there are a light-hearted banter between the two before the manager, the first class agent, says, he is a prodigy, he said at last. He is an emissary of pity, science, progress, devil knows what else. And he's somebody who is needed for the guidance of the cause for which Europe is uh, for which Europe is working. Today he is the chief of the best station. Next year he will be assistant manager. 2 years more, but I dare say you know what he will be in. Now, this is how the name of Kurtz once again crops up. His mention is made, and we do have a very strong feeling that uh, the narrative is gradually, physically, he's bringing Marlowe closer to Kurtz because he's destined to go to the inner station, but the the uh, obsession with Kurtz in the mind of every single person is becoming more and more tangible. So now we can here uh, say something with some confidence that Kurtz uh, is obviously a very enigmatic figure. He he is the only person who has been given the name in the colonial establishment. Rest of the characters are deliberately left unnamed and are referred to by their titles or by derogatory epithets such as pip, papier mâché, Mephistopheles, chattering idiot, and the first person at the company station, the accountant, was called a miracle. So it seems to be a deliberate choice on the part of the narrator, who happens to be Marlowe, to keep these people unnamed. We shall have more on this later on. But yesterday in my lecture, I said that Kurtz embodies so many things. So the last lines I have read give us a very clear clue that Kurtz, who we will see crawling on all fours in the end, just like that sick man in the grove of trees, is a kind of an apostle. He's a messenger, a man with higher intelligence. And if we link all these things, we can say that he represents the, the, the illusion of civilization, which acts as a justification for the colonial setup, and is which is a, if we use Marlowe's, Marlowe says he hates lies. He says, let me read. I would have gone so far as to fight for Kurtz, but I went for him near enough to a lie. You know, I hate, detest, can't bear a lie. Not because I am straighter than the rest of us, but simply because it appalls me. There is a taint of death, a flavor of mortality in lies. What is exactly what I hate and detest in the world? What I want to forget. It makes me miserable and sick, like biting something rotten would do. He says, I have a strange aversion to lies, and this can be linked with what we were saying, that after all, the illusion at the back of the colonial dispensation, colonial system, that it is the white man's burden to civilize the world, and colonial rule is a method, is a process uh, of taking the light of modernity to the uncivilized parts of the world, is an illusion. It is a lie. I will conclude with one or two things. By now, Marlowe seems to have developed an obsession, he says, with Kurtz. Kurtz, whom At the time, I did not see, you understand? He was just a word for me. I did not see the man in the name any more than you do. But still he was something he had begun to haunt me. This is what he says. So we will conclude here.